Hi, welcome to It's Messy, but It's So Good. Today I have an interview with Kristofer Rios, filmmaker and journalist from New York City. As a journalist, Kristofer has covered immigration and social justice issues, producing investigative news documentaries for HBO Max, Hulu, ABC News, Univision Fusion, and has written for The Guardian and The New York Times. Kristofer was the co-director and co-executive producer of Menudo, Forever Young, a 4-part documentary series about the rise and fall of the Puerto Rican boy band Menudo. Kristofer shares his passion for storytelling, how world travel and experience as a community organizer and advocate shaped his career. And Kristofer shares his courage through many challenges, which has led to increased confidence and his personal growth as a journalist and filmmaker. Stay tuned and enjoy. Thanks for listening. Hello, Kristofer.
Hi.
It's so nice to have you on the podcast. It's messy, but it's so good.
Thank you for having me.
No, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. And what I'd like to do is just go over your bio to let everybody know a little bit about you before we get started. Kristofer Rios is a filmmaker and journalist from New York City. And as a journalist, he's covered immigration and social justice issues, producing investigative news documentaries for HBO Max, Hulu, ABC News, Univision Fusion, The Guardian, and The New York Times. Most recently, Kristofer was the co-director and co-executive producer of Menudo, Forever Young, a 4-part documentary series about the rise and fall of the Puerto Rican boy band Menudo. He is also a producer on the upcoming National Geographic docuseries Science Fair, The Series. Kristofer previously was at ABC News Nightline, where he worked on features and documentaries for the nightly news show. And Kristofer's work has been recognized by the GLAAD Media Awards, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and the Edward R. Murrow Awards. He was a 2023 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University and has a Master of Science in Journalism from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. Wow.
But more importantly, I'm your nephew.
Absolutely. More importantly.
The highest honor.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I feel the same way. Mutual Admiration Society.
Mm.
So I guess I'd like to get started with asking you, like, from the beginning of your career, your passion for the media, for journalism, if you could share a little bit about your journey and, from the very beginning, going through maybe to the present day in whatever form works for you.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to start at the very, very beginning, I think that the passion developed when I was a child. Stories have always been sort of the way I've been able to understand and process the world. Connect to other people, connect to my family, and understand who they are and where they've come from. I mean, obviously when you're young, you can articulate it in that way. But yeah, I mean, it was always a part of my world. My parents did a really good job at sort of talking and story and sharing story. I think my family, people like you, always did a really good job at sort of encouraging and nurturing that impulse and that instinct. I think that my earliest memory of actually being able to link this sort of love of story and this idea that you can maybe make a living off of it was in I want to say like in the 5th or 6th grade, right around the war in the Balkans. It was, I used to watch with my parents. I used to watch in the morning CNN, and so you're getting ready to go to school and you're seeing these images of other kids that look like you fleeing rocket attacks and living in a part of the world that is, just devastated by war, not unlike what's happening in Ukraine right now. And I was really distraught. It really, it really had an impact on me. And I think right around that time, I needed to do like an English writing assignment, or maybe it was for social studies. And my mom had suggested that maybe I research the war to understand it better. And in the process of doing that, I came across a special that Peter Jennings, who is a renowned broadcast journalist, he had done with actually several of his colleagues who are now pretty famous. Robert Krulwich, who's of NPR fame, and Anderson Cooper, who is on CNN now. And it was what we would call an explainer in these days, right? You got a bunch of high school students who are from different parts of, sort of conflicting countries in the Balkans, both here in America and both in the Balkans. And they basically explained what was happening. And there was something about seeing that news special, having this person that I had seen every night on the nightly news kind of take the time in a different setting to talk to children like me and not necessarily say, hey, it's going to be okay, because it wasn't okay, but just sort of say, this is how we got here and this is why it is, why this is how it is. It helped me, one, feel a little bit better, less anxious about this, less confused. But it also was kind of the moment where I realized that there's a real power to storytelling, that there's a real power to explaining things, to connecting in narrative. And I think from that moment on, I couldn't voice it, but I think from that moment on, I really was trying to find my way to the profession, find my way to becoming a journalist. And, it took a lot of winding paths. Although looking back on it, they all make sense. I think, I started the school newspaper in my high school. When I went to undergrad, I think I went in saying that I really wanted to, be a journalist. But there was no journalism sort of, quote unquote journalism major in my college. So I took things that I thought made sense, like political science and women's studies and, all these other courses that sort of helped expand my understanding and my empathy. Immediately after undergrad, I went on a fellowship where I traveled the world for a year. And that also sort of expanded my sense of self and expanded, my sense of the world and really deepened my empathy. When I got back, I worked in a music magazine for a little while and really learned the hard skills of, working in a newsroom. But I found that writing about music wasn't as fulfilling. So then I became a community organizer. I did a lot of work around media policy, but really more directly working with, low income and underprivileged youth, working with, undocumented immigrants, working with domestic workers. And I think that time period also kind of was part of, even though it seems like it was a little bit of a detour, looking back on it, it gave me the skills that I needed so that when I actually did ultimately become a journalist, I wasn't afraid to go into certain communities and connect. I wasn't afraid to, take risks on stories that the media says weren't necessarily important, but I knew and I felt deep down were important because I had worked very directly one-on-one with these communities. So I think getting to where I got or where I am, really was just about following my instincts. And every time I tried to do something that didn't align with it, there was a sort of sense deep down inside that, I was off my path and, I felt, I would feel really unhappy and anxious, frustrated. And once I sort of got back on this path of, fulfilling this dream, when I was very young of becoming a professional storyteller, that's when I was at my happiest. And it's not perfect. There's a lot of problems, I think, with the way in which we make money off of telling stories, right? And there's several industries around that. There's the news and media industry. There's the entertainment industry. There's a lot of things that are sort of, imperfect. But when I'm doing the work, when I'm, out there, reporting, when I'm out there connecting with people, when I'm in an edit, trying to figure out how to take real life stories and communicate them to a bigger audience, I'm happy, I'm like at my happiest. And, and it's taken a lot of there's been a lot of risk taking. There's been a lot of sort of trying things and maybe not knowing if they're going to work out. But to me, that always, even though it was very scary in moments, it always felt better than doing the alternative, which is not really following my path. And so, here I am.
Yeah, it's, I call that coherence, when we come into alignment of, it's like a flow that's deep from our passion, from our soul, and it kind of guides us, and we all get off course. And like from my experience, like I know I'm off course when, just like you shared, you're anxious, sometimes angry, frustrated, disappointed. Yeah, those things happen in life, right? But it's always coming back and like, okay, taking a look, right? What's going on with me? What do I really want? What am I afraid of? What do I need to do to expand, to go back into coherence? And then we're in that creative flow, it's called joy, and I think there's contrast in life, right? And those things, when we're off course, are always, the quote, it doesn't happen to you, it's happening for you. Hard to get because we want everything to be, just going great all the time. But we learn, right, the biggest lessons that we need to learn. So it's beautiful just hearing your whole story from this desire and passion and how you did take all those risks. And, each junction we learn so much. And then looking back, it's when we reflect and we look back that we go, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah. I mean, even the times when it feels like you're seemingly off course. It's funny, so I did a lot of media policy, for a couple of years, and that's very much not, it's storytelling in a way, but it's very wonky, right? So a lot of the work, that I did in that space was, listening to communities and figuring out where are the gaps between what the government, should be doing for them in terms of media policy, right? And how we can work with those communities to help advocate for whatever the problem is. So an example would be, it seems silly now, but not having access to adequate and fast internet, right? For people who could afford it, or for people who live in parts of the country that were well connected, wasn't so much a problem, right? But for people who couldn't afford it, or who live in parts of the country or parts of a city that, the wires were literally not getting to them, it's a huge, it's a huge barrier, right? And so there's a lot that we take for granted with the internet. You can apply for jobs, you can apply for unemployment, if you don't have access, then everything becomes harder and more expensive. And so we spent a lot of time listening to communities and figuring out, not just what were the barriers and what other problems came about from not having internet, right? But also what they thought the solutions would be. And then you go down to the FCC, go to Washington, go down to the FCC and, tell people, hey, this is what the communities are saying. And you try to get policy enacted to fix it. So that felt at the time when I was doing it, it felt like a very slow process. And it felt like, not exactly like what I wanted to be doing, which is what I'm doing now, doing news and doing documentaries. But looking back on it, it gave me so much understanding and knowledge about not just, the process of how you go and listen, right? Which is a really important process in what I do. Being able to just take your assumptions about who a person is or what a story is, set them aside and start by, listening first. that's kind of the core of community organizing. And so that's a skill that I still use today in my work. And I think it deepens and makes my work, richer. Right. But then also like, working in Washington and working with the folks who are like setting the laws and the policies that govern the work that I do, like that has given me a lot of understanding to sort of this context that I think is really, useful and helpful in my everyday work.
Yeah. Knowing like what you're up against and the process. And, what a thought came to me, how, when you're working with, social justice issues and just, the communities that you've worked with, what was the response to you and people on your crew and people that were on the project? How did they respond? Did they, just how did they respond?
Yeah, I mean, it's varied, right? Like, I think that, because it depends on the story, it depends on the issue. I think more often than not, because I had that experience of working in this, not in the capacity of a journalist, but working as an organizer, as an advocate for certain communities. I understand the vocabulary, the language, the underlying problems too. Like we can talk about, you take the migrant issue, for example, right? We can talk about the immediate problem, which is that migrants are coming to New York and they're having a hard time accessing housing and accessing, jobs, right? But that's the immediate problem. But there's underlying issues, by them just being here in the United States. There's underlying issues and challenges in the home countries where they've left, right? And so the problem that's in front of you is not always really, it's usually not really the problem, right? It's, there's a lot of other things. And when you really start digging, there's a deeper issue at hand. And so because I understand that, I'm usually pretty good at, having a conversation that acknowledges that maybe, yes, we're talking about this one story, but you contain multitudes and there's a lot of other stories that you might have, a lot of other issues, a lot of other problems that you're dealing with, that might even impact our interaction, that might even impact like the way in which we go about working together to get your story out in this moment. And so having that patience and that understanding, usually, makes it so that when I do report on communities that, are underprivileged or communities that are vulnerable, that it goes pretty smoothly. And it really just comes down to acknowledging that, like there's a lot more to people than what's on the surface. Sadly, that's not how like all my colleagues operate, but I think the ones that I work with the most and the ones that are really great, I think that's how they move in, in the world. Like just, we're trained as journalists or we used to, I think this is being challenged a lot more now, but we were trained to sort of have like objectivity, right? Which I've always rejected. It's taken me a while to be disarticulated about it, but I've always rejected because it's just kind of impossible for anyone to be objective. We move through the world and we carry these experiences with us, and those experiences, they frame and shape how we see things, right? And I think that what's becoming more popular now, and what I've always known intuitively, is that, like, yes, we have a responsibility in our profession to be factual and to report facts, right? But objectivity assumes like a universal truth, and that's really put us in a situation where we've ignored a lot of stories. It's like, whose truth, right? Well, the people who the people who have decided what truth is, they've left a lot of stories out. They've left a lot of perspectives and a lot of narratives and a lot of people out of that truth with a capital T. If you go in and you approach it and you say, my job is to report the facts, right? To be factual, then I think you shift the perspective. That means that you actually have a responsibility to talk to as many people as possible and to talk to them openly and talk to them, with empathy and understanding, to get a bigger sense and a bigger sense of what the story is. And then, and this is where the subjectivity comes in, based on that reporting, you need to try to communicate the issue through editing, right? And so by acknowledging that, like, you know, that I'm bringing a perspective and that, you know, that I'm not completely objective, but that I have done my work, right? I have done all the reporting necessary in order to present to you this story in this way, right? I think that builds trust in the audience and it sort of sets a standard in our profession that is just way more, allows for a lot more room for all kinds of people to have their voices heard. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that, like, it's just specifically when dealing with vulnerable communities, that process is really important because they've normally, like, historically, they've been harmed by the media because of this sort of false pretense of objectivity. And that's always how I've approached it. And oftentimes, you know, people respect that and people are happy. You know, I also acknowledge that, like, I come from, you know, like I'm in a position of privilege right now because I'm able to tell stories and put them out and make a living off of it. But I come from an underprivileged background, you know, like I come from a biracial family, right? My family wasn't always well off, you know? And I think voicing that and acknowledging that and saying, you know, yes, I'm in a better place now, but I do have an understanding, about, you know, the spaces and places that you might come from. That also helps find common ground, and helps people just sort of, you know, trust you a little bit better. Now, with that trust comes a lot of responsibility. But if you're responsible with it, then at the end, you know, I think people feel really good about having their story, having shared their story, having let you borrow their story and put it out there. Yeah, but every now and then, you know, like, I mean, this country is hard for a lot of people, and this country has for generations hurt, you know, like certain kinds of people more than others. And so every now and then you go in and to a story and you know, you try to communicate and you try to set, you know, that space and those boundaries. And it's still difficult, you know, it's still difficult because maybe people are in crisis. And, you know, in crisis, I think I've learned to understand it differently. Just because someone is now out of immediate danger doesn't mean that they're not still in crisis, right? Yeah. And so, like, you know, sometimes people are in crisis and they're not their best selves, and, you know, and it can be challenging. But for me, it's always in those situations about patience and understanding and empathy and really trying to, you know, if the goal and the importance is to tell the best story possible and to make sure that people feel represented in the work that you do, then I think my responsibility is to allow that space in that room for them to not be their best selves sometimes, you know, because we're not always our best selves, you know, and to be complex and to be, you know, to have, you know, multitudes. You have to allow for that because I'm not perfect, you know, no one is. And to pretend that the people in your story, you know, are anything but, right, is dishonest. It's dishonest to your audience. And so it's a commitment sometimes, you know, it's always a commitment, but sometimes that commitment requires, you know, work. But I don't know, like, I think that's, to me, those stories are the best, right? Like when you're able to show someone in their full selves, you know, even though you're still just sort of dropping into a moment in time in their life, like letting them have the space to, you know, be complex, and then putting it out there and then people watching it and responding to that complexity. I think that's really exciting. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah. Was there one particular piece of work that you did that is closer to your heart, you know, than, I mean, not there's many, but.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like with any profession, like you do work to just, you know, you're doing work, right? Like you go in and some days it's not like the story that you're most passionate about. I've been really lucky in that, you know, most things that I've worked on, I feel really proud of, you know. I've had that sort of privilege and that blessing to be able to be put on projects that are close to my heart, right? For different reasons, but yeah. So it's hard to pick. I think that
So picking your favorite child.
yeah, there's people who have left impressions. I did a story about Cuban skateboarders many years ago, and I mean, I'm really proud of that one. Not because I think we did a good job, but I just think that we were able to. That was a project where we were able to really we had so many great people that we were following, and we were able to really kind of showcase them. Yeah, and I've developed lifelong friendships with a lot of these guys, and we keep in touch, and so that one's really special to see, how the guys in the film, how they've sort of evolved and how they've grown, right? So not kind of what you see on screen, but sort of the relationship after, and to see just sort of how they're still figuring it out, and I think similarly, so the science fair, the series, which you mentioned in my bio, the original project was a documentary, you can watch. I'll plug it on Disney Plus.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's called Science Fair. And my role on that project was really there's many different people that we featured, but I followed a woman named Dr. Serena McCullough, who runs a really, if not the most successful science research program in the country, if not the world, then one of the most successful science research programs in the country and the world. And we're good friends, I worked with her again for this series. And I think that we've developed a really great relationship of mutual respect for each other's work and, mutual trust. And that's really awesome. And I think, the reason I think why, we have that is because she reminds me a lot of people in my life. She reminds me a little bit of myself. And so I think ultimately, when you make these projects, what you want is for people to see, when they see themselves on TV or on screen, to see that you've reflected them, fully. And I think with her and with many of the people that I work with, it's that I hold, close to my heart, it's because I see a little bit of myself in them. And because I see myself in them, I bring a lot of respect to, because when you're in production, I'm talking about it very kind of theoretically right now, but it's really just the logistics. Journalism and filmmaking is just logistics. It's a lot of conversations about, time and place and how long are we going to be doing this and when are we going to do this, and a lot of negotiations. It's not what people think of it when they see Spielberg or Scorsese with the director's scarf and yelling action. That's that fun creative part is maybe 10 to 15% of all the work that there is to do. And so I guess what I'm saying is that the actual work can be very mechanical and very cold. And if you don't remind yourself that the actual, especially in documentary filmmaking or when you do journalism, if you don't remind yourself that that these are real people that are just like you, then it can be very kind of clinical. And, I've seen it happen that way and it doesn't feel great, and so I think that the people that have left impressions on me are people who I've been able to, not make the experience sort of clinical and really kind of, be humans with them in their space and then capture that. Right. And, and so far so good. No one's called me and said I totally misrepresented them.
Thank you for all of that. And I just see so many pearls of wisdom for journalism and new journalism. Students out there are coming into the field, filmmakers. There's so much richness that you shared, and I appreciate that. And as far as things getting messy, though, I mean, you did share some of that. when things don't go right on set or, with a piece, and, you feel like you kind of have to put things back on track, what kind of tools or what kind of ways have you found most helpful that you can share with the audience, that especially for new journalists and filmmakers that might be kind of struggling with some of this fear and anxiety?
Yeah. Well, things don't go well, right? Yeah. Like production, like all of production is messy. Just like life, right? Like, I mean, you make a plan and then it goes out the window almost immediately. And I'm trying to think about the most recent project that I was on. Yeah. And I mean, like, it got crazy pretty quickly. And so I think it's like the rules, like what I do, sort of the parameters I set for myself for when things get messy is how I approach life. It's like, first of all, I think it's really important to understand what's important. What's the most important thing in production, or in journalism. I always say, I borrowed this from, I had a chance to work to do a documentary, on a Disney animated film. And they always kind of, it was like almost like a mantra, everything in service to story.
Mm.
And it was like, I don't know, there's something so simple and yet so complicated about that statement, but it's really been helpful for me to kind of, when thinking about my work, right? Like what is sort of the most important thing? And, story, if you're making an animated film, or if you're telling a news story, or telling, if you're making a documentary, all it means is that, like, the most important thing is, whoever is at the center of that narrative. Right. And also I think the reason why that's super important is the other part of it is the audience, whoever's going to watch that. Right. So you have sort of these dual responsibilities. And so once you sort of frame it like that, if we once had a truck, get flooded, right? Like in a downpour, right? Well, okay, that's a huge problem. We need the gear out of it. You can get all cranky about it, but it's like, that's just one obstacle, and in the way of actually what's most important, which is story. So then it's like, well, what do? You figure it out, right? Because that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that the person at the center of it, the person that you're going to interview that day, that they feel comfortable, that they feel able to share all of themselves in the interview, and so you just sort of always constantly reframe whenever an obstacle comes up, whenever things get messy, you take a step back and you ask yourself, what's most important? The people at the center of the story. Okay, let me focus on that, and everything else, if it's not an urgent emergency, I'll deal with it later.
Yes.
Yeah, because there's so many different kinds of problems that happen in production as in life. And you can get really caught up in the specifics of, addressing that problem. And half the time they solve themselves, like half the time they seem like big deals, but they end up, someone ends up stepping in to help out, or, as it's sort of the process moves forward, it works itself out. And I think that's sort of a lot of how I've learned and how I try to remind myself to treat life. There's these things that happen, you ding your car, right? And so now you have to deal with insurance and all that stuff, and there are annoyances, and they can be expensive sometimes, right? But is that the most important thing? Like, should you lose sleep over it? No, right? The most important thing in my personal life is family, right?
Mm.
And just remembering that core, always kind of helps me through tough times. Right. Yeah. So it's like, I can get into specifics, like really production is, it's just sort of like, if you watch any, even if it's bad, right? If you watch TV or Netflix or whatever, right? And you see something and you're like, man, that wasn't good. I still think that it's a miracle that it was done, like that it actually completed, because like, that's like, all it is just putting out fire after fire after fire from the moment that you have the idea and it becomes real and someone says, okay, cool, it's greenlit, here's the money to do it. It's just putting out enough fires that you actually can get it to the point where even when you turn it in, there's still fires to put out, right? Yeah. So you have to continue to put out fires until it ends up on TV. So I always even if it's bad, I always celebrate it because, it was a feat, to in the madness, find a kernel of creativity and get it out into the world. And now people can critique it, and like, I think that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Creativity, the whole process, no perfection. It doesn't go from A to B. People in their minds, I guess, when they're thinking about doing something creative, because our minds are trying to keep us safe all the time. It's like, it has to be this way. And we box ourselves into the way our perception. But in reality, that's where, like what you were sharing, that's where we learn all the lessons when things go bing bong. And then we get not only experience, we get more insight into ourselves. And I think we become more empathetic to people that we're working with, whether it be the team or, the actual talent, or, people in the docuseries or the people that we're working with. So that's really good. And I love, it's mindset, for sure. But I think it's like throwing the ego out as much as possible.
No, that's really,
center.
That's truly it. And I think that oftentimes when the worst problems I've had to confront in work and in life really is when it's ego. It's when we, like, wherever the conflict is, wherever the sort of impasse is, both parties, both sides of it are so self-focused, right? Mm-hmm. And they're not able to think of why the other person might be, acting the way that they're acting. And, if you can't do that, then you're at an impasse, right? It's untenable. And those are sort of the hardest problems to get over, because then you have to stop and then walk back to where the actual conflict happened. And I think really try to get people to see that it's not about the problem. It's about them kind of being entrenched into self, right? And if you want to move forward and you want whatever the task at hand is to be successful, that you need to sort of get over yourself, right? For the good of the project, right? Or for whatever, right? And that to me is always the biggest production challenge and also the biggest issue in life. It's like, it's ego.
Yeah. It's like a reflection, right? It's a mirror for us. Basically.
Yeah. But it's funny on that theme, like, I don't think I've ever said this publicly, but whatever. I think part of the reason why because I was trained as a journalist, and I always imagined my career as like strictly as a journalist. Like I actually love writing, and I would have, if I was still working at the Miami Herald writing for that newspaper, I think I'd be happy. Right. But when I started making documentaries, early on in my career, one of the first things I got credit for was something that, I felt like could have been better. It wasn't terrible, but it just the execution. I think there's a lot of great kernels, but it didn't amount to sort of like, I think a artfully crafted story. Mm-hmm. And then, it shows up on your IMDb page and you have a credit there. And so it's the reason why I just couldn't have that be the only thing to my IMDb credit page. So I looked for more opportunities to sort of try to, and that's very ego driven, right? It's like, I think most people would watch the documentary and be like, that was a fine documentary, but I felt like it could have been better. And So the initial impulse to sort of make documentaries, was a very ego driven thing. But then in sort of reflection and analyzing why I felt like that project didn't go so well, partially I was just being too hard on myself. Right. And partially the problems that came about in the telling of the stories, was ego. And so it all kind of correlates. It all kind of connects.
Yeah. And it's a learning process, right? So if you hadn't made that, maybe you wouldn't be as great as you are today. So
yeah, well, I don't know if I'm great, but
I
keep.
you are.
Thank you.
I enjoy everything you do, and I watch everything you do. So we're gonna kind of wrap up a little bit, and I just wanted to know what if you're working on any projects right now, you might kind of be in a transition spot, which is also part of the industry. But is there anything that you wanted to share about what you might be working on there?
Yeah, I mean, I am. So I just finished this fellowship, which was a really important and necessary time I took to, I'm kind of what you would call mid-career. Right now I've been working as a journalist and as a filmmaker for over 10 years now. And I went on this fellowship to really step back and figure out, why am I doing this? Cause it's hard work, and, you don't always feel like people appreciate, and by people, I mean, again, this is ego, right? Your bosses, like the industry, that they don't really appreciate the perspective or like how you're trying to do things. So it can get frustrating. So I took this 10 months to work through some of these bigger kind of questions of the profession, but really, I think to work through whether I want to still do this or not.
Right.
And I've come out on the other end that, being able to say, yes, I do want to still do this. So the hard part is that, I want to still do this, but not the way I was doing it before. Mm-hmm. And figuring that out is not easy because, there is an industry mapped on to all of this sort of, theoretical and intellectual kind of, how we theorize and intellectualize our work. There's some money making, sort of industry mapped onto it. So it's really hard, to be creative, to be, a journalist that, be excellent, every time as a journalist when you have this money making structure on top of it. So right now I'm really trying to figure out if I do want to continue to do this, what does that look like for me? Mm-hmm. And so I'm what we call freelance. And I actually been pretty lucky. Like, since I've retired from the fellowship and started working again, I've only worked on, for the most part, projects, that have been creatively fulfilling, have been, exciting, fun, and have been great stories. And most of those projects have been projects that my friends are doing. So right now I'm, supporting my brilliant friends who have brilliant projects, but there is something hopefully that might be coming through. And I don't want to jinx it, but also I can't really say it until it's like, it's a done deal. But if it does happen, I think it'll really pull in a lot of my experience, my most immediate documentary experience of working with, Latinx stories, right? So, it is a Latinx story. It is a story about, music or a musician, right? And it would really kind of pull in this most immediate experience, but, it would present new challenges. And the really exciting thing about it is that if it does happen, it'll be an opportunity to sort of, this is someone who is really well known in the Spanish speaking Latin American world. But is now sort of gain more sort of attention and fame in sort of the English speaking world, the diaspora. And so it would be a real chance to, help that person say what they want to say to their fans, but also to this new audience that they're kind of encountering and they're engaging with. And, and I think for me that's really cool. One of the missions, now moving forward which I think has always been the mission, but is really because I'm in a position where I am bilingual. I am from the diaspora, but I also spent a lot of time in Latin America, or like at least in Puerto Rico on the island. So there's a code switching skill there. There's an ability to communicate. And oftentimes, because those stories are hard for an English speaking, news outlet or an English speaking, kind of streaming platform to tell, because they don't have those skills, those stories don't get told, or they get told in sort of a way that kind of essentializes or sort of stereotypes or, typecast people. And so I really want to be a part of telling those stories in a way that are full and complex. And so it'd be great if this happens. And if it does, it'll be work, but it'll be fun. But that's kind of, I think that's my window. So the other projects that I'm looking at, that I'm working on, they fall sort of within that category, yeah. And some of them make, some of them I get paid for, some of them I don't get paid for, but it's okay, because I'm in a position right now where I can have that room. But it's really figuring out, I think, moving forward, like how to pay my bills, but also tell stories that are meaningful to me. And yeah. And it's always, I think that's what most of us in the industry are trying to do. And that's always in contention. But I'm determined to make it work. And if not, I don't know what else I'll do.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being so, vulnerable and it's so helpful to people in the industry and any of the audience, really, because we all are going through our own stuff, right? No matter, this is like whatever your passion is, wherever your creativity is, whatever your avenue is, it's messy, but
yeah.
Right.
No, but I think we touched on this, but I think it's worth kind of saying again, like, I mean, the things have been easy for me. I haven't really learned much from, maybe like, I don't even know if I remember them, right? Like maybe, like it's through sort of, challenging situations that I think we find out who we are, and we find that confidence, we find that trust in ourselves, right? To persevere. And so, and I do think that like I don't know, we've created this sort of, and this is particularly American, I think, but we've created this sort of false perception that like, life is supposed to be easy, like it's supposed to be convenient. It's supposed to be, safe and secure. I mean, it really hasn't been that way for humans for most of our existence. And it's nice, it's nice to have that security, but, and it's only been that way for a certain, class of people, right? Like, not everyone gets to, to have that privilege. So I think just like being a little bit more honest with ourselves about, adversity and conflict and, and difficult situations, I think that's helpful. And it helps us, it's helped me at least find the strength to take the risks, and it hasn't been by myself, like you have to find the strength. Really, the strength is like to tell the people around you that are supporting you, that love you, hey, I want to do this thing that may not seem like the safest or smartest or, most logical or, this thing, but I really feel compelled to do it. And having the courage to articulate that to your loved ones around you, and then seeing how they react. And I've been really blessed to have people in my life that have always supported me and encouraged me, yeah. So like, I know it's not for everyone, but I learn the most when I go through, things that are challenging, and those are the things that sort of leave impressions, on my heart. Yeah.
I love that. It's beautiful. Thank you. So a question that I ask everyone as we say goodbye for now is, what is the biggest gift, which you kind of touched on, what is the biggest gift you received from following your passion?
Oh, wow. Well, my life hasn't been boring. But I guess what I mean to say is that, I've just met a lot of really amazing people, all over the world, from all different parts of life. And, like, to me, selfishly, that's a real blessing, because like humanity's pretty cool. I know that like we turn on the news and like, it's like, oh, this horrible thing happened and this horrible thing happened. But when what I've sort of followed my passion, and I've been able to go to so many different places, in so many different parts of the world. When I say places, I mean, like I'm not going to Brazil just to hang out, like, in Ipanema, right? Like I'm going to Brazil and I'm seeing what life is like in a favela, right? And I've seen that in Ghana, and I've seen that in, like in many different parts of this country, right? And when you have that blessing and that privilege to have seen so much, and meet so many people from so many parts of the world in different walks of life, you realize that at the core, we're all the same. Like at the core, we just want the same things. And, even if things are really hard, we laugh, we cry, we share, right? And so I don't walk around feeling scared of like my neighbors, or scared of like, there's bad things out there. But that's part of life, right? But I think more like the more common thing is that we actually all want the same thing. We want to be understood. We want to share our experiences. We want to love, and that to me is a real gift, like to know that, when I walk in the world, I'm walking like everyone has a potentially interesting story, and everyone, no matter what their day is like, really kind of wants the same thing. So it's really great. And I'm really glad. I think back to the moment where like, I think that first fellowship that I went on, I was very scared to go on because I was going to leave home for a year and I couldn't come back. And I think back to that even that first week, my mom likes to tell the story. It's like, I think I landed in London and it was like, like I couldn't understand anyone, and the food, like scrambled eggs wasn't scrambled eggs. At least now I know that, right? And I called and I was like really sad. Mom was like, man up, like this, you chose this, like go for it. And I did. And I'm really glad, like from that moment on, like, I think it's really what I'm looking for is not just the ability to tell stories, but just to meet people, and to learn from people. So yeah, it's really fortunate, and it's really about not being scared, and it's hard not to be scared. I'm a very anxious person, but, really kind of psyching yourself up, like to jump into it.
And what you said before too is the support of others,
Mm-hmm.
that are rooting for you.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean,
courage.
That's, I'm able to say all this stuff because I think the biggest blessing is my family, like, I've never, not only have I not had anybody in my family tell me I can't do anything, but when someone else tells me I can't do anything, my family has like rallied around me, like, and really giving me that confidence to be like, oh yeah, you think I can't do it? Watch me. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky, like I recognize it. Like that's it. You don't choose that. It's just the cards that you're dealt. Right. And so, for me, if it were different, I don't know that I would be here. Even if it was slightly different, if my dad wasn't around, or if like, we weren't lucky or privileged enough to have gone to college, right? Like just even slightly different, I might be a drastically different person. But that's why, like, when I think about all the things that have come to me, all the good things that have come to me, I give that credit to my family.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. Thank you. All right. Well, I just wanted to know if you could share some of your social media handles if someone would like to connect with you.
Sure. I'm extremely, it's not private. I just like, I'm scared of social media. I feel like it's shouting the streets, but I do.
The one that you use, Instagram, I think you use, right?
Yeah, Instagram. Yeah. And so it's, I have to check it because I think I changed it recently. It used to be Kristofer Rios with one R, but I think I changed it to have two R's now because people were confused. Okay. So on Instagram, it's Kristofer.Rios, and that's Kristofer.Rios. Yeah. And I'm on there and happy to connect with folks. And if you want to check out my work, it's not all my work, but I have a website, www.k-rios.com. So it's, Rios is Rios, and you can see some of sort of my bigger projects and things that I feel like I've had a lot of, creative say in. Yeah. And my email is up there, so you can also email me there.
Okay. That would be wonderful. And we'll put it in the show notes as well, so people will have it. So
Great.
Thank you so much, Kristofer. This has been
Thank you.
an amazing interview, and I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate the chance to share my story.
Hey, thanks for joining us at It's Messy, but It's So Good. And if you'd like to contact Kristofer Rios, he'd love to hear from you. The contact information is in the show notes. I just wanted to remind you that you can subscribe to my newsletter and receive passion, reflection, and journaling prompts. And this is very, very helpful for many phases of your life. If you're passionate and you're a multi-passionate person and you want to know where to put your energy right now, or perhaps you're in retirement or post-retirement or starting out in your career, or you want to refocus your career in a new direction, these prompts are very helpful. Giving yourself some time to just really get in touch with your deepest feelings. So enjoy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.